I thought the worst kind of betrayal was finding out your husband was seeing someone else, but I was wrong. The worst part was watching the other woman step into my home like she belonged there, then seeing her face change when she looked up at the family photo above our fireplace. My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 32 years old. I live in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, and until that evening, I thought I understood exactly what my life was. I was a wife, a mother, and the person who kept everything in our house running on time, from school lunches to mortgage payments to the little birthday candles my daughter liked me to save in a kitchen drawer. Our home wasn't some giant mansion out of a movie. It was a warm two-story house with white siding, a wide front porch, and a brick fireplace in the living room that had always made me feel safe in the winter. Above it hung the photo I loved most, the one we took last Thanksgiving, with Ethan standing behind me and our daughter Sophie smiling in her red sweater between us. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people envied without saying it out loud. That afternoon, I left work early because Sophie was spending the night at my sister's house, and I wanted to surprise Ethan with dinner. I stopped at the grocery store, bought fresh rosemary, a pack of ribeye steaks, and the expensive bottle of red wine we had been saving for a special occasion. I remember feeling almost excited on the drive home, like maybe we had both been so busy lately that we just needed one quiet evening to find our way back to each other. I had no idea that by the time I set those grocery bags on my kitchen counter, my marriage was already standing at the front door, ready to walk in with a smile I would never forget. I had just started trimming the rosemary when I heard a car door close outside. It was a small sound, ordinary, the kind you stop noticing after years in the same neighborhood. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel and glancing at the clock on the microwave. Ethan was early. That alone should have told me something was off. He was almost never home before 6:30, and even when he usually texted first to say he was stuck in traffic on Interstate 71 or stopping for gas or picking up something from the pharmacy. But that evening there was no text, no call, just the sound of footsteps on the front walk, and the low murmur of voices coming through the door before it even opened. Voices, plural. I stood still in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, listening as the front door swung inward and laughter drifted into the hallway. A woman laughed softly, like she was trying to be charming without trying too hard. Then I heard Ethan answer her in that warm, easy voice I had not heard in months. For one strange second my mind reached for harmless explanations. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe a client. Maybe someone from the neighborhood I had forgotten about. But deep down, before I even stepped out of the kitchen, something cold moved through me. I walked toward the foyer slowly, my socks silent against the hardwood floor, and every detail around me suddenly felt too sharp. The lamp by the stairs was on. My purse was still hanging on the hook by the door. The grocery receipt was sticking out of one of the bags on the kitchen island. Everything in my house looked exactly the same. That was what made it worse. Because when I reached the opening to the living room and saw Ethan standing there with one hand lightly resting at the back of a woman I had never seen before, I understood in one sickening instant that the only thing that had changed was my entire life. For a moment none of us moved. The room felt unnaturally still, like the air itself had frozen around us. Ethan looked at me without surprise, without guilt, without even the basic discomfort of a man who had been caught doing something wrong. He just stood there in his navy work jacket, one hand still resting behind that woman as if bringing her into our living room was the most natural thing in the world. She was tall, polished, maybe in her late 20s, with smooth dark hair falling over one shoulder and a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than I usually spent on clothes in a season. She looked at me with mild curiosity, not embarrassment, not concern. Just the calm expression of someone who had clearly been told a version of this story that made her feel safe. Ethan was the first to speak. "Lauren," he said, in the same voice he used to ask me to pass the salt at dinner, "do not make this difficult." I actually stared at him because I could not process what I had just heard. Difficult. As if I were the problem standing in the way of his evening. The woman beside him gave a small, uncertain smile, and Ethan turned slightly toward her. "Vanessa," he said, "this is Lauren." He paused for half a second, then added, "We have been in the middle of sorting things out for a while." Sorting things out. I felt those words land harder than a scream would have. My mouth went dry. We were not separated. We were not discussing divorce. We had argued, yes. We had grown distant, yes. But that morning I had still packed his lunch in a blue insulated bag and reminded him that Sophie needed cupcakes for school on Friday. Vanessa looked from him to me, her confidence slipping just a little. I could see the question forming behind her eyes. But Ethan kept going, calm and cold, as if he needed to control the room before the truth had a chance to breathe. And then he said the one thing that made my whole body go still. He told her this house was practically his now. For a second I could not even feel my hands. The dish towel was still between my fingers, but it no longer felt real. I just stood there staring at Ethan, trying to understand how a man could speak so casually while tearing apart the life we had built room by room, year by year. Vanessa shifted beside him, and I noticed the smallest change in her expression. The easy confidence she had walked in with was not gone, but it had cracked. She glanced at me again, longer this time, like she was finally seeing something Ethan had forgotten to warn her about. Maybe it was the groceries still sitting on the kitchen island. Maybe it was the framed crayon drawing Sophie had made for me on the side table. Maybe it was the fact that I did not look like a woman in the middle of leaving. I looked like the woman who lived there. Ethan, I said quietly, and even to my own ears my voice sounded strange, too calm, too controlled. What exactly did you tell her? He let out a slow breath like I was exhausting him. Lauren, do not do this tonight, he said. Vanessa does not need to hear all the details. The details. I almost laughed, but nothing inside me was light enough for that. Vanessa turned toward him. You said you were separated, she said carefully. Ethan gave her a tight smile, the kind he used when he wanted to smooth over a problem without actually answering it. We are, he said. It is complicated. No, I said, finally stepping farther into the room. It is actually very simple. We are married. We live in this house together. Our 8-year-old daughter sleeps in the bedroom at the end of the hall, and this morning he kissed her on the forehead before school like everything was normal. Silence dropped over the room after that. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, and the faint ticking of the wall clock near the staircase. Vanessa did not speak. She just slowly turned her head, taking in the room for the first time with new eyes, and then she looked toward the fireplace. Vanessa did not move right away. Her eyes drifted toward the fireplace slowly, almost absent-mindedly at first, like she was only looking for somewhere else to rest her attention. The late afternoon light coming through the front windows stretched across the living room floor in long golden bands, catching the edges of the picture frames and the glass candle holders on the mantel. I could hear the soft hum of the ceiling vent, the faint traffic outside, and the sharp little click of Vanessa's heel as she took one careful step forward. Ethan noticed the shift in her attention and straightened slightly. It was subtle, but I saw it. For the first time since he walked in, he looked uncertain. Vanessa kept staring at the mantel. There were 5 framed photos up there, all arranged by season because I changed them every few months. Sophie at the pumpkin patch last fall. Our family at the county fair last summer. A Christmas photo in matching sweaters that Ethan had complained about wearing but smiled through anyway. And at the center, slightly higher than the others, was the one from Thanksgiving. It was the one guests always notice first. Warm firelight behind us. Sophie in front. Me seated on the hearth. Ethan standing behind my shoulder with one hand resting lightly near my collarbone, looking every bit like a husband proud of the life in front of him. Vanessa took another step closer. Her face had gone still in a way that unsettled me more than anger would have. She was not embarrassed now. She was studying, looking closely. Her eyes moved from Sophie to me, then up to Ethan, then to a smaller silver frame near the right side of the mantel that most people barely noticed. I had left it there for years without thinking much about it. Ethan must have followed her line of sight because he spoke too quickly, too lightly. It is just family stuff, he said. Do not overthink it. But Vanessa did not answer him. She leaned in, her entire expression changing with every second, and when she finally looked back at him, the color in her face had started to drain. Vanessa stared at the smaller silver frame like it had reached out and touched her. For a second she did not blink. She just stood there with her shoulders suddenly rigid, one hand still hanging at her side, the other tightening slowly around the strap of her purse. I had seen that frame so many times I barely noticed it anymore. It was an old photo, taken years before Ethan and I were married, back when we were still dating and spending weekends at his mother's lake house in northern Michigan. In it, Ethan stood beside an older man with broad shoulders and kind eyes, both of them smiling into the camera with fishing poles in their hands. The man had passed away 3 years earlier, and Ethan had insisted on keeping that picture on the mantle because, as he once told me, it reminded him of the only person who had ever really taught him what loyalty meant. Vanessa turned her head very slowly toward Ethan. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then she whispered one name. Richard. The room went completely still. Ethan's face changed so fast it was almost frightening. Not angry. Not defensive. Just caught. The kind of expression that appears when someone realizes the lie they built so carefully has just cracked open in the middle. Vanessa looked back at the photo, then at Ethan again, and this time her voice was stronger. Why do you have a picture of my father in your house? My breath caught so sharply it hurt. I looked from her to the mantle and back again, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I had just heard. Ethan stepped forward too quickly. Vanessa, listen to me, he said, but she moved back before he could get closer. Her face had gone pale now, not with confusion but with recognition. I knew that look. It was the moment a person stops guessing and starts understanding. And when Vanessa spoke again, every word landed like a stone. She said, my father warned me about a man named Ethan Hayes 5 years ago. And then she looked directly at me and asked, how long have you been married to him? 8 years, I said, and my own voice sounded far away to me, like it belonged to someone standing outside the room listening through glass. Vanessa closed her eyes for one brief second, then opened them again with a look I will never forget. It was not the look of a woman caught in someone else's marriage anymore. It was the look of someone realizing she had walked straight into a lie that had been waiting for her long before she arrived. Ethan ran a hand over the back of his neck and forced a quiet laugh that fooled no one. This is getting twisted, he said. Vanessa, your father knew me a long time ago. That is all. But she shook her head immediately. No. Her voice was firm now, steadier than mine. He did not just know you. He told me to stay away from you. He told me you were charming when you wanted something and cold the moment you got it. Ethan's face hardened. Lauren, do not stand there and act like this means anything, he said, turning to me as if he could still control the direction of the room. But the strange thing was I was no longer looking at him the way I had been 5 minutes earlier. The shock was still there, yes, but something sharper had pushed through it. I was starting to see the pattern. Vanessa looked at me again. 5 years ago, my father found messages on my phone, she said quietly. Ethan had been talking to me back then. I was 23. He told me he wanted to leave his relationship and start over. My stomach dropped so suddenly I had to grip the edge of a chair. 5 years ago. Sophie would have been 3. I stared at Ethan, trying to connect that number to the man who had tucked our daughter into bed and mowed the lawn on Saturdays and complained about property taxes every spring. Richard made him disappear, Vanessa continued. My father told him never to contact me again. Then her voice cracked for the first time. And you told me he was your old mentor. You told me he respected you. The room felt smaller with every breath. Ethan opened his mouth like he was about to explain himself, but there was no explanation large enough for what had just been uncovered in front of that fireplace. Vanessa stared at him with a kind of disbelief that had already turned into disgust. You knew exactly who my father was, she said. You knew from the beginning. Ethan tried to recover the calm tone he always used when he wanted to sound reasonable. Vanessa, I did not plan for this to happen like this. That sentence alone told me everything. Not that he was sorry. Not that he had lied. Only that things had not unfolded the way he wanted. I looked at him and for the first time that evening I did not feel shaken. I felt clear. Cold almost. You need to leave, I said. Ethan turned toward me sharply. Lauren, do not start making demands in my house. My house. He said it again even now. I looked him straight in the eye. Then let us be accurate, I said quietly. This house is in my name and my mother's trust. And you know that because you sat beside me when we signed the papers. Vanessa's head turned toward him so fast it was almost a snap. You told me you own this place, she said. Ethan said nothing. That silence was louder than anything else he had said all night. Vanessa stepped back from him like she could no longer stand the space between them. Then she looked at me, and whatever rivalry might have existed an hour earlier was gone. I am sorry, she said, her voice low and unsteady. I did not know. I believed him. I nodded once because I could see now that she had not walked in as some master of the situation. She had walked in carrying her own lie. Ethan tried again, reaching for control that was no longer there. "We can talk about this like adults," he said. But I was already done talking. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The evening air rushed in, cool and sharp, and the whole house seemed to exhale with me. Then I told him the one thing he never thought he would hear from me. I said, "You do not get to rewrite this story anymore." Neither of them argued after that. Vanessa was the first to move. She stepped past Ethan without looking at him, her face pale and tight, one hand pressed against the strap of her purse like it was the only steady thing left in the room. When she reached the doorway, she paused for half a second and turned back toward me. "I am truly sorry," she said again, and this time I believed her. Then she walked out into the cold evening, her heels fading down the porch steps, her car door shutting a moment later with a hollow sound that echoed through the quiet. Ethan stayed where he was, standing in the middle of the living room like a man who had finally run out of versions of himself to offer. The golden light outside had started to dim, and the house looked different now, not broken, not ruined, just stripped clean of illusion. For years I had mistaken routine for safety. Family dinners, school drop-offs, mortgage payments, holiday photos above the fireplace. I had believed those things meant love was still living inside the walls. But standing there with the front door open and the chill moving through the hallway, I understood something I should have learned much sooner. A home is not held together by appearances. It is held together by truth. And once truth is gone, all you have left is a stage set waiting to collapse. Ethan finally looked at me and said my name in a voice I barely recognized. Not angry, not cold, just small. But I did not answer. I did not need an apology shaped to protect him. I did not need another explanation stitched together from whatever pieces still made him look less guilty. I simply walked past him, took the Thanksgiving photo down from above the fireplace, and held it carefully against my chest for a moment. Sophie was still smiling in that picture. I was smiling too. I looked at that woman and realized she was not weak for trusting the wrong person. She was strong for surviving the moment she finally saw him clearly. When Ethan picked up his keys and left without another word, I locked the door behind him, stood in the silence of my own house, and for the first time all evening I did not feel abandoned. I felt free.